All right, so I get asked this question all the time on this channel, and that is, how am I so lucky? And I'll answer that question by saying that it's not really luck as much as it is research and just trying to be the first person into a site with the metal detector. Bottom line, if you're the first one there, then you're gonna have, the first opportunity at everything that's there. You come in behind somebody else and you'll be lucky to find something that they missed. All right, so here's some sites that you may never thought about checking before. These are the kind of sites that I've done very well at, and certainly these types of sites are right here in my backyard. I live in California up here near Sacramento, so I have the California Gold Rush, I have the California Delta waterways. So these sites are sites that I found that I did very well at, and they could be right in your backyard as well. Get a piece of paper out, write down, and follow along as I go, and things will come to your mind that you're gonna wanna jot down, and then you should try to develop your own leads. And you may very well be the first metal detectorist to turn on a machine at one of these sites, and you'll thank me later for it. All right, stay tuned, here we go. All right, first on the list here is old swimming holes. This could be a pond, it could be a lake, it could be the ocean. But really, I think you should try to focus on rivers, because that's where I've always done really well, is at old rivers. So I know here in the California Delta, we had a couple places that I found. One was called Hog's Back, and one was called Bare Ass Beach. And I went out there, found these spots, and there hadn't been anybody there in 40 or 50 years probably. But back in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, with the invention of the car, the automobile, these places were really popular on the weekends, and there was hundreds, if not thousands of people that would go through these places on a weekend and just swim all up and down the river. And I found so many coins, and I'll tell you, the coins are still there. They're laying right there in the mud, in the sand. They haven't moved at all. And a lot of times they come out looking like they were just dropped too. And you could start by doing like I did and look at old postcards and old images in your area, and you may find something, and then you just talk to some people, some older folks in your area that had swim at these locations, and you're off and running, you got some research going. I guarantee you'll find one of these spots that no one's ever found before. All right, next thing on the list here, circus. The circus used to come to town in just about every big town, really, and they would always set up somewhere just in a field. And again, if you talk to the old timers in the area, they will remember where the circus used to be. And it could be just a lot somewhere that you never even thought about today. It could be on top of a hill. It could be a spot that has not been developed on, and these are the kind of places you're going to want to find. If you can't find one of these places in your town, try adjacent towns until you do find an old area where the circus used to come to town and set up once or twice a year, where it's still just a field. Go out there and check that field. I'll bet you'll find something. All right, what about boxing matches, right? You used to have exhibition boxing. It was real popular back in the 1920s, 30s, 40s. And these are like they're like the circus. They'd come to town, they'd find a field somewhere. It was a traveling show. They'd bring the boxers with them, and they'd set the ring up somewhere, and the next thing you know, there's a boxing match. And sometimes it'd be just like, hey, there's a boxing match coming this weekend. Then they'd move to the next town. If you can use your historical newspaper archives to try to find out, or again, talk to some old timers, and try to figure out where the boxing matches were in your area. It may not be in your town, but it's probably a town nearby. If you could find that field and it's still there, it could be good. All right, how about this for another one you may never have thought about before? I remember when I was a kid in the 1970s, late 1970s, there was a couple different drag race tracks that were literally just straight roads. And everybody would come out there on the weekends, and this is kind of before the police would really bother them, and all the best cars, the fastest cars would come out, and all the way down the edges of the drag strip, which is kind of crazy to think about today for safety reasons, were spectators. And a lot of them would come out in the hundreds and line the track and bet and watch and enjoy drag racing. And if you could find an old drag racing track and check around the area where the start and the finish might have been, and also check around the edges, you might do really well, because these are the kind of things that were so popular that just about every weekend in nice weather, guys and gals would get out there and race their cars. And you could also take this to motorcycle racing, circle track racing, dirt tracks that are gone. Anything like that you could find that's racing oriented, you should definitely check it out, because they drew huge crowds, and a lot of times they had vendors there too. You may be the first metal detectorist ever to find one of these old drag strips. All right, this one here is kind of obvious. You may have thought about this, and that's okay. Train stations, right? Well, I'm not talking about your typical train station like you may see on an old postcard or that you might have in your town. It's, been historically preserved or whatever. I'm talking about train stops along the way that were kind of forgotten. So it wasn't always a train station at a train stop. If you can do some research and start with your local railroad historical societies, probably to get started, or again, archival newspaper articles, and try to figure out where the train stops were, you may find that there was a really popular stop somewhere where there was a bunch of people that all lived in the area, and they would all come down to that train stop. And if you could find those areas, I've seen pictures of 20, 40 to 200 people just standing at the train stop waiting for the train to come in to go to Virginia City or wherever they were headed. And it's not a train station, it's a train stop, places you never thought to check. If you could find an old train stop somewhere, I promise you'll find some really cool stuff. And again, you might be the first person ever there because most of us are drawn to the train stations. Check that out. Good lead right there. All right, the next one is flea markets. And I call it a flea market because that might be a modern term, flea market. I don't know what they called them back in the day, but they were pop-up markets. And they were really no different than the flea markets we have today. But they've been doing this for 100 years. So you may want to go try to figure out, again, doing some research, talking to some old timers, if they can remember where the old street markets, flea markets were at. And these are places that you could walk out right now into a field somewhere and never even think that there was something there. And it could be absolutely loaded, not only with coins, but with the things they dropped at the flea market, like jewelry and all kinds of other stuff. Could be one you never thought about that really could pay off for you. All right, and my own personal favorite off this list is riverboat landings. When you're doing your research, try to start with like steamship and see if you can get into that era, because then it takes you all the way back to the 1800s, the mid 1800s, to the late 1800s. You can get into some really early sites where the steamships used to dock along the edges of the rivers or lakes. Depends on where you live. Yeah, riverboat landings. Again, you could do some research on postcards. You see the pictures I have here. There was always a landing somewhere, and there was always an island or another place that a steamship or a riverboat would be taking passengers to. So try that out. It was really good for me. Again, if you find stuff in a river around the sand and buried in the mud, it always comes out looking just beautiful because the stuff in the mud down there doesn't see a lot of oxygen, and the coins and stuff come out looking really cool. So I wish you luck on that. It worked for me, and it was fun doing the research on the old steamship and riverboat landings. All right, be honest now. Tell me if you've thought of this before. How about old concert fields where they had concerts? Could be from the 1970s like you see in some of these pictures right here. It could be from the 1940s or 50s where they had just wooden dance floors or just concert areas, and they'd make a concert out in the field and get a bunch of different artists from out of town. But there was always a place somewhere, and a lot of them are rural. You would never believe, like look where Woodstock was, right? So you want to try to find these old areas where they had concerts. And again, your historical newspaper archives, your old timers in your area will lead you in the direction of where there may have been some concerts in your area. Could be just a field now, and I guarantee that is going to be loaded. Those concerts, people were out there just in the cold mud, the cold water sometimes, the cold air, rings are falling off, coins are falling out of the pockets. There's just like, look at the pictures of Woodstock where they're out there just slipping, sliding, and you know that there's so much stuff was lost out there. If you're the first one to find an old field where there was a concert, it could be good, and it could keep you busy for weeks, for several hunts, because it could be huge and completely loaded with stuff. So I hope that you will find one of those, but check that out. And have you thought about that one before? All right, how about scout camps? Now we always think about scout camps, but what you really want to do is, instead of focusing on where the scout camps were, is try to figure out where the jamborees were, because that's where all the different troops all came together for a big jamboree. And do some research on this. If you can figure out where the Scout Jamborees were, not only did you have hundreds of scouts there from all over the area, but you had parents and scout leaders, and there was a lot of folks walking around losing money and coins and jewelry and everything else. And if you focus real hard on the Scout Jamborees, I think you'll do very well. But the camps are pretty good too. Scouting goes back 100 years. So me and a couple buddies were up in some hills one time. We found an old scout camp, was completely overgrown. We brought our own tools in. and spent about an hour or two removing a bunch of weeds and wood and stuff and just made the area accessible, turned the machines on, and bang, silver everywhere. Walking Liberty halves, standing Liberty quarters. It was awesome. Find yourself a scout camp that no one's ever checked before, or find it where there was a jamboree. That could be huge for you guys. All right, this one's kind of obvious, old playgrounds. I'm not talking about the playgrounds like in the park, in the city park. I'm talking about those little playgrounds that were hidden on the backside of an old apartment complex or near an old pond, or those places that were kind of small little playgrounds that weren't really part of a big park. Try to find one of those old, long lost locations where there may be a swing set. And look at this contraption. These kids back in the 1920s and 30s were up there hanging upside down. Everything fell out of their pockets. You find one of these spots like this, and this is kind of a crazy contraption, but they had these back in the 20s and 30s. You could do some research and you'll see that these are the kind of things that they made for kids to climb around on. You know, any place where kids are hanging upside down, they're gonna lose stuff. So try to find those old playgrounds that really aren't part of a park, but more of a neighborhood playground kind of, or part of a housing project or something like that, something that was kind of lost and forgotten. All right, that's it. That's my top 10 list. And again, getting back to just the research part of it, we talked about the old historical newspaper archives. Do like I did, do a search for old postcards, and when you type in postcards, like say for example, steamship or steamboat, and you type in postcard, if you type in RPPC, that stands for Real Picture Postcard, that's a type of postcard that's more like a photograph. And it puts you in a time period about the 1920s to the 1950s, and it gets you kind of back into the period you want to be in with those real picture postcards, RPPC. So type that in when you're doing your research. And again, talk to the old timers in your area. Go to your public library, your local historical society, and check all those kind of places. And remember, you can kind of niche in, like I talked about with the train stuff. Talk to the train historians in your area. And you know, the internet is just completely full of all kinds of great digital newspaper archive sites. There's going to be one for your area. I have 3 or 4 that I use here in California that are just awesome. You type in a search word, a search term, and then you could, you know, you could separate it by this newspaper during this date range and get real focused in on your area. Works great for me. If you haven't checked out LiDAR yet, you should check that out. There's some really good videos on YouTube about how to use LiDAR, L-I-D-A-R, and that shows you the contour of the ground. That's something that could help you find some of these sites as well. And again, just talk to anybody that's been around for a long time in an area where they grew up in that area. You would be surprised at the things that not only they remember that they did, but that their parents or their grandparents told them about. They may have told them, we used to swim in that hole over there. Even though your grandparent didn't swim in that hole, your great-great-grandparent may have. So this is how we find out a lot of information. It's good fun. It's always an adventure, guys. I really appreciate you watching the channel, watching this video. Go down below in the comments and what did I miss? Tell me some more places that other people may not have thought about. What are some places that are kind of, you know, off the beaten path, places that most of us would never even think about where you've done well? Go down in the comments, leave me a comment down there. Of course, you can ask a question. I try to answer all of my comments. I appreciate you guys stopping by. If you like the video, go ahead and drop a like and subscribe, and you get to see all my videos. I have about 130 videos on here. Most of them are educational, and they're specific to certain machines, but there's a lot of cool adventures too, a lot of great digs. I've dug pounds of gold on this channel. So once again, appreciate you guys stopping by. Hope to see you again. Take care.